again, I'm pleased to be here presenting for you guys on my new book that came out in May, which is part of the Knowledge in a Nutshell series from Arcturus Books in London, and different people wrote, someone else wrote Sigmund Freud, and I got to write Carl Jung. So that was fun for me, as you might imagine. All right, so I'm gonna take you fully into the slideshow mode here. Okay, lights, camera, action. All right, so there's the book cover, and I do have one here. I just wanted to give a little background about where I'm coming from. So does that picture ring any bells for anybody? Okay, that is Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, Canada, where I grew up and Joni Mitchell grew up, and she painted that on the cover of her Clouds album. If you don't have the videos along the side there, you can see that same building, which is the Besborough Hotel. It's Saskatoon. Great place to grow up, great public education. And I got to, as part of my public education, I got to do the MBTI when I was 13 in grade 7. So I've had a long journey with Jung that continues. I then went to the UBC, University of British Columbia, Canada, in Vancouver. Just studied a little bit of Jung there, but mostly other things. And then I went to the West Coast home of Jung that many of you know, Pacifica Graduate Institute up in Carpinteria, and have still pretty involved there. And I'm on the board of a new entity called the Academy of Imaginal Arts and Sciences that Stephen Eisenstadt, the founder of Pacifica, is doing, pairing depth psychology with technological advancements, which is fun. And in 2011, I started Jungian Online, which connects people with Jungian analysts to work via live video. And that business, as you can imagine, has been exploding. And we have doubled and doubled again this year. So we're very busy, and lots of folks want to work with an analyst via video, so that's fun. And I also started more recently the Jung Archademy, which is people that are the analysts that are on Jungian Online, offering courses and sharing their insight with people. So if you want to follow Jungian courses, sign up for the mailing list at jungarchademy.com. 2014, my first book that Mary Grace mentioned came out, which is a sort of a magnum opus, mostly on the feminine, really, and reemergence of the feminine in our time, and I'm very proud of that book. Little thick. This one's a little easier to read. I decided after 365 pages on that, and I could make smaller statements. That would be okay. So I'll take you into this book now. So I don't know about complete guide, but it's a good opening guide. And what my friends have said and what the Amazon reviews are saying that I really appreciate is that I seem to have given the breadth and given the key parts in a way that's easily read, easily understood, easily comprehended and consumed, without losing some of the subtle mystery and those bits. So that's a very nice compliment to receive, and I'm very pleased that that is how it has come out. I'm doing a course, and I'll tell you more about that at the end based on the book, and some of the Jungian analysts on my team are joining me to guest lecture starting in October. I'll tell you that at the end. So going into the book, there's the chapters. Of course, it's pretty straightforward for those of you that are familiar with Jung. I'm not going to go into every one, but I'll show you a few of those there as we go through it. So you guys, many of you I'm sure, are pretty familiar with Jung. I'm just going to change one thing on my view here. Okay. Born in 1875, died in 1961. He gave us so much of our psychological language: the word extrovert, the word introvert, collective unconscious, complex, synchronicity. All of those are words that Jung gave us. And of course, he started as Freud's heir apparent, and they had their split, but so much of the way that we talk about psychology today comes from Jung. The way we use the word archetype, the way we approach dreams, of course, MBTI and the personality type theory comes directly from Jung's work. But one of the things that I want to just introduce you to that you might not be aware of is the extent to which Jung turned his inner life into physical objects of art. Is one thing that really impressed me that I was able to see last April in Santa Barbara. They had Jung's art as a traveling exhibit, including this painting, carvings that he made, and all of these were ways of bringing the spirit into the physical world, bringing what was moving through him inside into physical form. And I don't think we can underestimate how important that was. When he got to his confrontation with the unconscious period after the breakup with Freud, and he was really, devastated, and these powerful images were moving through him, he was able to honor them and give them form by through the use of art. And I think that's so important. To understand that it wasn't just the sort of endless, head trip, that there was something physical that he was doing that was powerful and important for him. So I read in the book, the images of the Red Book depict quite exactly what this experience was like for Jung. Seeing his artwork up close, one is struck by his dedication to the inner world. Art historian Jill Mellick observed throughout it all, he gave primacy to the process, and he valued direct inner experience. So some of you might be familiar with the orphan stone that he had at Bowlingen, and here he is, chipping that stone himself. He was working with stone, he was working with wood, he was working with gouache and oil paint, and not just sort of doing an internal trip. There was an external concretization of these images. So Jung used the process of making art to allow his hands to unfold what the ego resisted, and discovered the power of creativity as healing work. With an attitude of play, Jung held the tension between the emergent inner voice and the ego. Out of the well-held inner dialogue, something new emerges. A new understanding, a new attitude, or a symbol. That's a carving that I saw that Jung made. It's called Loki or Hephaestus. People might not know that James Joyce worked with Jung and brought his daughter to work with Jung, and they had quite a dialogue. People also may not be aware that during World War II, Jung was a spy for the Allies and wrote profiles of all the Axis leaders that were delivered to Eisenhower and others. And I'm sure many of you might know who Alan Dulles is. He said, nobody will ever know how much Professor Jung contributed to the Allied cause during the war. Alan Dulles was the head of the first, what was called OSS, or became later the CIA, sort of intelligence services. And I think that that's pretty important to understand, certainly because one of the things that I've seen in my life is that when you're around real darkness, either in a personal sense or a collective sense, people tend to go a bit unconscious. I've been in a room with somebody who really, violated the space really badly. And a lot of people just immediately kind of go into a trauma state and avoid it. I think it's really morally difficult to call out darkness. And I think, a lot of people talk about the shadow today as if the only route to the shadow is an interior route and looking for the shadow inside ourselves. I say that the shadow is in the outer world. Every moral action is an integration of the shadow on some level, and that standing up in the world for what's important and calling out the shadow in the outer world is something that we must do and should continue to do today. There was a great correspondence between Bill W. and the founder of Alcoholics Anonymous, and that, when Jung split from Freud, it was about Jung saying, hey, there's a spiritual principle in addition to the sexuality principle that Freud thought was the cause of all creativity and art and spirituality. And Jung said, no, there's a spiritual principle. And of course, that came into his dialogue with Bill W. and came into having that step in the 12-step programs to this day. Are we doing okay? I just want to check in. We're doing okay? All right. Okay. So people may not understand this, but in Jung's time, his books were reviewed in the newspapers of the day. So when Psychological Types came out in 1921, that was reviewed all around the world in the papers of the day. And D.H. Lawrence is reading Jung, and so many of the intellectuals of the time are into Jung and reading him. And my understanding is that Jung has also outsold Freud 2-1 the whole time. So that's my little Jungian dig there. But I think it's important to appreciate that he has been hugely popular. 1951 on the cover of Time magazine. And of course, all of this pop culture stuff, including the Police's album Synchronicity, and Sting is still very much into Jung. I saw a copy of the Red Book behind him in a recent documentary I watched. The Rolling Stones and Sympathy for the Devil song and all that, reading Jung, and so many of the other acts of the time as well. And you even see Jung there on the cover of Sgt. Pepper in the top row. So hugely influential figure. And what's really interesting to me is that has not dissipated, that Jung continues to be as popular as ever today. And I write in the book that today the international Jungian community is an organically growing worldwide phenomenon. Unexpected outgrowths of interest have popped up outside the English-speaking world. You may not be aware that Jung and Freud are very popular across South America. Both are taught in college, and analysis is commonly undertaken. In Asia, China recently hosted a conference attended by 3,000 people, and Korea has a Jung Institute of its own. Perhaps most remarkably, Jung's work bloomed anew in the creative expression of the popular K-pop or Korean pop band BTS. Their album Map of the Soul Persona was based on a book by the Jungian analyst Marie Stein, and it explores their own struggles of identity. Their album was a chart topper, such a chart topper that it drove Stein's book back onto the bestseller list. And if you guys might not know this, but this band is humongous. Well, I mean, across all, I know someone who's 25 in Lithuania who loves this band and idolizes these guys. So amongst the 20s and younger, this band is they sold out, I think huge, we're selling out huge baseball stadiums, in the United States when they toured. So they're a huge band, and Jung just pops up in these places. And to me, I think it's because there's a naturalness to what he was observing. He was really listening to the psyche, not so much for me, making up theories and intellectualizing. He was saying, what's in here for me? And that's why, to me, it feels organic, and it keeps popping up in these other places. Okay, so that gives the scope. I think it's important to understand the influence of Jung and that it's still alive. This is not something of the past. So to get into the book a little bit, chapter 1, just give you an idea of what each chapter. So chapter 1, of course, the early beginnings of Jung. Where does the term complex come from? At the end of every chapter, there's one of these key points things. So Jung invented the word association experiment, which led him to discover the complex, which gets us into the unconscious. And there's a great term called Weltanschauung, which is our attitude toward life. And Jung thought the function of analysis was to help us, have a more healthy and complete attitude towards life. And I think that's a really important way of thinking about what we're doing in analysis. Okay, chapter 2, shadow. I'm not going to do all of them, like I said, but I'll just give you a little taste. So this is from Jung quotes, not in the book, but I said, I once knew an old lady who was very aristocratic and noble, who conducted her life according to the most exquisite ideas of refinement. But at night, she would dream about drunkenness, and in those dreams, she herself would become hopelessly intoxicated. And so one must be what one is. One must discover one's own individuality, that center of personality, which is equidistant between the conscious and the unconscious. We must aim for that ideal point toward which nature appears to be directing us. Only from that point can one satisfy one's own needs. So the sense of an other in us that we're going to have to reconcile with. So this is from Elizabeth Pomez, who's a Jungian analyst on Jungian Online. It's quoted in the book. She says, "I felt at first that acceptance of the shadow meant agreeing with those parts of myself. Gradually, I came to realize it was not the case. Accepting and recognizing meant making those aspects of myself conscious. It did not mean necessarily liking or condoning them, but accepting that they were there." And I think for me that description is very powerful from Elizabeth. She talks about that shadow as an other insider who she's never going to agree with, who holds the opposite values. How could you ever even really like the other inside you that holds the opposite values compared to what your conscious values are? Of course, they're opposite values. You're never going to get along. But yet, that other is there. So I like that attitude and that approach. And so that you can understand from there that, we don't get to do what Jung calls wholeness by cutting off anything. We're not going for perfectionism and pretending things aren't there in denial. We're saying, hey, these others are there in us, and can we integrate these contraries and get toward wholeness? And another quote from Jung, I think, connects to this, which is, "The right way to wholeness is made up of fateful detours and wrong turnings." And there's this attitude of, Jung would say things like, bring me your folly, not your wisdom. And that, we're going to understand who we are through our mistakes. And again, I think that plays back into AA and his connection with Bill W., that, it's this attitude of perfectionism is not going to help us, that we need to invite and be willing to look at the things that we do that we didn't plan to do, that are, all the things about ourselves that we maybe don't want to see right away, or that the ego doesn't want to see. Okay, so Chapter 4, Chapter 3 is inner work. We talk about active imagination and dream work in Chapter 3. Chapter 4, the self. I'm just going to change this so I can see it. Okay. As with the nautilus shell, I'm just going to read it this way, sorry. As with the nautilus, whose shell repeats its spiral form while growing larger, nature preserves our inherent pattern while spurring our transformation. There's an instinct within living systems to endlessly renew themselves while maintaining the integrity of their unique structure. In our personal lives, the self is the blueprint of our potential unfolding and the path to greater unity of conscious and unconscious in us. Jung sought perpetually reorienting us toward balance and guiding us into greater wholeness. Like many of nature's systems, the psyche is self-regulating. So that's just a little bit on the self there. Of course, I write about personality types, which many of you know is a real area of expertise for me. Like I said, 35 years of looking through the world with that lens, so I know that pretty well. Chapter 6, I talk about the archetype material that you guys, many of you are familiar with me. Chapter 7, I talk about anima and animus. And I'm not going to read you the anima and animus stuff because I want to give us some time for questions. Chapter 8, synchronicity, and I know you guys will love this stuff, so this is the last chapter. There's a couple appendix I'll tell you about, but so synchronicity. So it's a great story that I heard Richard Tarnas tell, and Harvey, you were there, and many of you were there with me at the Synchronicity Symposium when Richard Tarnas told this story. So he talks about being in a meeting about a colleague whose scientific paper, they were deciding whether it should be published or not. And Jung felt, no, this paper probably shouldn't be published. And he's having this meeting, and he realizes, oh, something's wrong with his watch. And he asks the guy, what time do you have? He says, oh, it's 5:30. Oh, my watch is off by 5 minutes or 10 minutes. And I just had it at the watchmaker, and it should be perfect. And of course, he's Swiss. So this is serious business, this watch stuff. And his watch is off. And so he looks at that, and this watch that had just been precision timepiece, as they say, it is off. And he takes that as a message that something is wrong with him. He's not getting it. He is off. And he says, whoa. Let's start this whole meeting over. And he changes his attitude toward the situation. And this is a guy who at that point is 77. Or, maybe, I don't know actually the age he was, but certainly, he's probably 75. If you're a psychological master at 75 and you're still willing to go, what am I not getting in the situation? To me, that's pretty good. And that's doing the work right till the end. So that's one of the stories that we talk about there in the book. And I'll give you a story from my own life here as well. So often synchronistic occurrences happen in situations charged with emotion, with affect, with feeling. Perhaps you run into a past lover traveling on the same path you had previously traveled together. And then you realize that you had taken the same trip with each other 10 years before to the day. Synchronicities often reflect powerful emotional realities inside us and suggest that we live in a world that seems built for them to happen, that values them and brings them into being. Appreciating them opens us to a wider worldview, one in which reality is full of meaning and that somehow spirit really is in matter. And of course, I think I might have shared this story with you guys previously when I had been there, but I had a very powerful synchronicity where I had this exact scenario happen. I was traveling in a small town in Saskatchewan, had to get off the highway to get gas and then back on the road towards the highway. And as I'm moving towards the highway, I'm driving up and I see this woman. I go, oh, this looks like my first love. And, I'm trying, oh, geez, it really looks like her. And I get closer. We're in the middle of nowhere. And I pull it up and it is her. And she's traveling the same direction with her sister and now husband, who I knew from when we were dating. So she rides with me and we follow them. We caravan and we're both going from Saskatchewan to Calgary. And we're chatting and we realize as we're chatting that it is 10 years to the day that we had been traveling as a couple in the same direction by train, 10 years to the day. So to me, that's a pretty powerful synchronicity. And of course, you can go and say, well, what does this mean? Are we supposed to get back together? Yet there's all the personal ways that you can try and grab onto it. But to me, I think the message of so many synchronicities is the synchronicity itself, that we live in a world where meaning brings events into coordination outside of the ego. We're not trying to make these things happen, like with the Tao. We're not trying to, this is not, we're not going to force reality to do what we want. No, we're just flowing. We're just in the flow. We're in the Tao, and these magical things happen. And what a different worldview that takes us to. And I think that's really, one of the most important things that we can take from Jung is that the honoring of something mysterious and meaningful and purposeful and that values emotion and heart. And I think, Jung said, feeling is psychic mass. So it's these connections that matter through the heart where the magic happens. It's that person that we're connected to, that we can feel something's going on with them. Okay, all right. So I get into Answer to Job at the end as well, which I know is probably something that you guys, some of you really care about. So we can talk about that if you want. At the end, there's a little field guide to Jung. What's the Jungian world in 2020 as far as I see it? So I wrote a few pages on that. And I talk about the backbone, obviously, being the Jung Institutes and the training center. And, one of the things that people don't know about maybe Jungian analysis is that how much it emphasizes the personal work. So even before someone starts analytical training, they have to do 100 hours of analysis. During their training, another 300 plus hours of analysis. So they're certainly learning clinically, they're learning about attachment theory, they're learning all the Jungian theory, they're learning psychiatry, they're learning all the different clinical things that a PhD in psychology would learn, and doing their work. And I think, to me, that's, you know, one of the things that makes the Jungian analysts different. And I, of course, have several of them joining me for the course coming up. Yeah, so David Presso is going to come on. Elizabeth Pomez is going to talk about animus. Serge Verville is going to answer questions about the self. And I'll give you the full schedule for the course here, all the different weeks. We do 2 sort of weeks at the end, one on synchronicity and one about answer to Job as part of our finale. Yeah, and I can give you the rundown on how all that will work. There's going to be 2 different time slots, so a Pacific time Thursday evening, and then also Sundays. People can join whichever time they want. The bonus lectures will be Sunday afternoon, because many of the folks are East Coast, and all of it's going to be available on video. So if you miss a session and you want to get the lecture or the discussion, it'll be around. I love this quote from Marie-Louise von Franz: if a person devotes themselves to the instructions of their unconscious, it can bestow this gift of renewal, so that suddenly life, which has been stale and dull, turns into a rich, unending adventure full of creative possibilities. And of course, you can work with the Jungian analyst on Jungian Online. And again, there's the dates for the course. And that's the book. So 8:30. We got time for questions. I can talk more about any of this. I have the book here. I can spend the next 10 minutes just reading. So what can I answer for you guys? I can look in the chat here too.
I just want to say thank you for the
Whoa.
Information on
thank you
book
for your
and on the course to everybody after the meeting.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Would you put the course information up on the screen and leave that?
This?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm taking notes and I want to copy all of that.
Take a screenshot.
I am, but I.
Okay. Command Shift 3 for you Mac people.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I see Ron's hand up. Did you want to ask Gary a question? Just unmute yourself. Ron, visible Ron now.
There it is.
Got to unmute though, Ron. Lower left corner maybe.
Nita, I'm gonna show you the
There.
week chart as well if you want to shoot that one.
Question
Good,
for
good.
for
Great.
Mike. Gary, did Jung have children and what happened to them?
Oh yes, I met one of his grandsons, I guess. Yeah, so he did. He had many children. I think six or seven. And you know, he was around, but he was also not around, and that was kind of on purpose. So of course, Jung's children kvetch about him and have their issues, but he was someone who certainly, you know, he had his home in Kusnacht, and he had Bollingen, which is this lakeside tower that he built himself. And that lakeside tower was, I mean, obviously to get away from the house and the family and the kids and to do the inner work. So, you know, he's not winning World's Greatest Dad awards, but he did other things. And I think, to me, I am not under the illusion that everybody is going to be everything to everyone, and that life is about making choices, and we're not going to satisfy everyone's agenda for us. So, he was who he was, and he had children, and he was certainly, you know, present and raised them all, but he was not exactly Mr. Stay around the house. He carved out space for his inner life, and I say thank God that he did. So,
Could you put up about the online
yeah,
slide for online?
that one.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Okay. I'm scrolling through this. It's harder because there's screen sharing. I see Thomas's hand, please.
Yeah.
Hi, Thomas.
Hi. Thank you very much for a very concise, let's say, look into Jung's life. Could you tell us a little bit about Emma Jung, his
Sure.
wife, and
Sure.
because she was a fascinating person, all
She
her
is,
work on the
yes.
Holy Grail.
Yes, yes, yeah. She also wrote a book on the Animus, Anima Anonymous. Yeah, so Emma Jung was the daughter of, I think, the second richest person in Switzerland. Her father was an industrialist. And she was very, to me, from a typological point of view, very sensate and judging, very formally dressed and present and grounded and strong. And maintained the household and ran all of the other parts of the Jung family life, and was an analyst in her own right. And my understanding of the foyer of the psychological club, there was a portrait of Jung, portrait of Emma Jung, and a portrait of Tony Wolff. And nobody's pretending that things were any different than they were. There was of course, Jung was in a relationship with Tony Wolff and was married to Emma. And that's a big story, but it certainly provided a lot of grist for that psychological mill, which gave us a lot, so.
Tim, please.
Yeah, Gary, could you say a few words about the Red Book?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, Tim. So I was fortunate to be in Santa Barbara last April and actually see the Red Book that was there at tours as part of an exhibit. And what's fascinating is, and this is I'll take you back to the images. So there's this one, for example. So Jung painted that. Jung painted every single cell of that. There are literally millions of little cells of color in the Red Book. And Jill Mellick, who's an art historian, I saw her give a whole lecture on this. There's no mistakes. Every cell is completed. He's really done a dedicated job, with this stuff. And that, of course, came out of the Black Books, which are now being released. He would do his inner visions or his dreams. He would write them down in that book, and then he translated them into this formal color format with the Red Book. And so, he would spend whole evenings, in there, just carefully going over each one. And to me, again, it's a testament to honoring these figures that he found living inside him. He didn't really, I don't believe that he considers those inner figures his, that they're in some way alive, objectively alive, not figments of his imagination. So he's taking this inner life very seriously and honoring it. And that's the one thing that spirit can't do. It can't come into physical form unless we do it for it. So whatever this is, that he was working with, the Red Book is his testament to that. And also, I think there's a profound satisfaction in giving these things form for the artist as well, and for the person who's had these experiences. I think when you have a profound experience, you want to house it. You want to show gratitude for it. You want to do something with it. So can I say something more about the Red Book, Tim?
Oh, yeah. There's so much in there. The 7 Sermons to the Dead, Abraxas, Philemon, all of these things that he had this personal experience of, and then would come back and he'd be there all night, and then in the morning come and write this stuff. It's absolutely incredible.
Yes. Yeah. And again, also, I just keep coming back to, it's almost like art. It was art therapy. This is the early art therapy stuff. There was so much material there, and we could talk about the different pieces that you talked about, but there was it wasn't just a theoretical thing for me. I think it is so important. And that, to me, that work is part of what gives the grounding. So when Jung gets more and more popular, of course, that's going to be potentially inflating and all this, but he's grounded in these physical things, and this physical practice and the physical honoring that he's given to this work. So I think that's really, really important, and continued to do that work, right? Cutting stone, shipping stone, right to the end, pretty much.
Mary, is that Sam or Mary? Somebody's got their hand up.
Yeah, Sam. Yeah, Gary, you mentioned Emma Jung's book on the Anima Anonymous.
Yes.
I was in analysis when I read that book, and I said to my analyst, she really didn't, the chapter, the other half on the male anima is not very good, but from my point of view.
Yeah.
And my analyst said to me, a female, well, she said, of course, she's a woman. But her chapter on, from my point of view, on the animus of a woman is really exquisite.
Mm-hmm.
As is another little book entitled "For Women Growing Older." I think it's Whitmont, but it's an excellent book in terms of trying to understand a woman's, as a male, understand a woman's animus and how it comes out in relationships and so forth. But great little book by Emma Jung.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Go ahead.
I'm guessing a lot of people may not understand the basic concept of anima and animus.
Sure. Okay, well, I do have a slide about that. Let me do this one. So, basically the concept for Jung is that, I'm like the most masculine man, there's a very feminine part inside him somewhere, and that we have an inner opposite. So our conscious self, for me, my type is an ENFP, and so my conscious self is extroverted and intuitive and feeling and perceiving, and it does all those things. Well, there's an inner opposite in me that is ISTJ. Well, you remember that woman that I told you I had the 10-year synchronicity? Well, she was a projective love at first sight. Well, not love at first sight, but we fell in love. Guess what her type is? ISTJ. And so these opposites attract. Our inner opposite is opposite type. It's opposite values. It's different. So we tend to project that and fall in love with somebody who has those opposite values. And so it's this inner figure inside of us. And if we can learn to work with that inner figure, we can find that it is guiding us towards greater wholeness, even through difficulty. So, you project your anima onto a woman and she breaks your heart. Okay, there's often grist for the mill in that, if you're willing to go in. There's an interesting film some of you might have seen, I just saw it recently, called Phantom Thread, starring Daniel Day-Lewis. And he's a creative type, and there's all kinds of things you could say about his character, but there's a female character in there, and her name is Alma. I'm sure many of you know that the word Alma means soul. And so if you look at that film on a literal level, you can say X, Y, and Z about it. But if you look at it on a psychological level, here's the ego, which has its rules, and I want things this way, and da-da-da-da. And the anima is breaking that down, breaking down the ego, and leading us to through a death and rebirth process into more and more growth. And the anima does that. And the anima and the animus also can make us love life, particularly the anima for men, can give us back our love for life, our wanting to, you guys know what I'm saying. So I hope I've given some justice to that.
Okay, I think we have time for one last question here.
Okay.
Checking, see if there's any hands. Is that Mim? Do you have your hand up, or are you just, no, I guess not. Let's see.
Sarah?
Sarah?
Yes.
Yes, please.
Your book sounds amazing. I'm going to buy it as soon as we get off. I was introduced to Jungian psychology about 3-4 years ago, and I'm obsessed. But I was wondering if I've been reading a lot about the different types, and I'm having a hard time finding other books on it. So I was wondering if there are any other books that you recommend on this topic.
Oh, I'd really have to think about it. I mean, there's a chapter in the book about psychological type. Hopefully that it's, you know, sort of a good enough description for something to get you going right now. I'd really have to think about it. I don't have off the top of my head a book that I love about type. If other of you, I know there's many Jungian readers on here, maybe some of you have a suggestion, but I mean, I've read lots of them, but I don't have anyone that I'm like, oh, that's a great one.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. You know, initially independently of Jung, two women, Isabel Briggs and I forget her first name, Myers, observed colleagues, they were faculty wives at Princeton, and observed the interaction among people, and they came up with a typology that is almost parallel to Jung's. So what the original book was called Gifts Differing. The idea on the Myers-Briggs being that people have different gifts, and not one, to be an introvert is not worse than to be an extrovert. They're just different gifts. So that's
For sure. Yeah. Thank you, Sam. Yeah.
Typology issue.
Yeah, for sure.
Thank you.
Okay, I think we are at 8:45. So, Gary, this has been just incredible. Thank you so much.
Wonderful.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.
Beautiful, beautiful. And now we go to a completely different mode. We go into business mode. So I guess one thing we want to do is set up for next week, and then we'll discuss any other business matters. So who's our speaker for next week?
Our speaker next week is Jared, who is in our group this morning, The Healing Power of Listening from the Heart, which I'm really looking forward to. It sounds like a wonderful morning.
Great. So we need a facilitator. Let's see, looking, I see, is that Melanie? Got your hand up? Is that Melanie? Okay, Melanie, facilitator, thank you. Meditation, Patricia. Yes, thank you. Then our spiritual reading, Thomas, thank you. And for closing prayer next week, we have searching. Let's see. Pamela, was it Pamela? Is it you hand up for next week? You're muted. You're muted.
It would be a double header because I'm doing it too.
It's your
Am I
choice.
allowed to-
It's
a
your
double
choice.
header?
Absolutely.
Okay. All
You wanna
right.
do it next week?
Yes. Yeah,
Okay, great. Well,
Right.
we're set then. Thank you all. Business, other business.
Hey, Bill, Pamela said she was doing a double header. What was the other thing, Pamela, you think
She's doing it today also, Tim.
Oh, okay,
Also today.
alrighty.
Let's see, Patricia, you have your hand up. Business.
I wanted to announce it's Hal's birthday on the 29th. Hal's birthday.
Whose birthday?
Hal's.
Al,
Hal.
the guy on the tropics. The guy on the desert island there.
Hal's in the tropics.
I'm
Happy
gonna be
birthday,
29
Hal.
again.
Happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
Okay.
Happy birthday to you.
Happy birthday to you.
Happy
Birthday,
birthday,
dear
dear
Al.
Happy birthday to you.
Happy birthday, Hal.
Hey.
Getting a kick out of us, huh, Gary?
Carolyn can hardly
Always,
handle it.
always.
Am I
Okay, we got-
right?
Okay, other business. Do we have any? I'm looking.
We have
Yeah.
so much time. We could ask Gary some more questions.
Yeah, sure.
Are you in Vancouver right now, Gary?
Yes.
Yeah. Are you having a heat spell? Are you having fires?
No.
Okay.
And
Yeah, I noticed you have on a hoodie.
Well, no, we're all good. It's all good up here, and we've definitely, you guys have been in our thoughts. I know there's a lot of stuff going on in California. So.
Thomas, you have a quick question?
Yes. Could Gary tell us a little bit about Marie-Louise von Franz, who I met in 1985 in Kushnacht, and just an incredible person. Maybe even say anything about what she's done with fairy tales.
Yeah, so Marie-Louise von Franz was Jung's sort of right-hand woman, of which you could say there were several, but she was probably the main Jungian, the biggest Jungian after Jung for the traditional Jungian school. Huge influence, very interested in alchemy and wrote on that, and very interested in fairy tales, has wonderful books on that, great books on the feminine. She started her own Jung Institute later in the game, and now there's a few different ones in Zurich, and she founded one of them. I think all that's very healthy to keep different strands and emphasis alive. I mean, I consider von Franz the same level I consider Jung, basically. I certainly look to her work regularly, and tons of wisdom. There's a book I'm going to get from her that's hard to find called Psychotherapy is the latest one on my list to read. So lots of juicy bits in there for the serious Jung students. Thank you.